Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the accessibility session of this 9th Informed Cities Forum. During the opening plenary of this conference, exploring the crossroads between heritage and e-mobility, participants created a word cloud in which the word accessibility stood out in bold, colorful letters, indicating the importance of making the transition to sustainable mobility accessible to all, but also the need of opening up heritage beyond physical, technological, and social barriers. So this is what this session is about, accessibility. So I was asked to self-describe myself, as well as some of the diagrams we will show in this session, in an effort to make the content of this session more accessible to visually impaired participants. As you have probably noted during your registration, we also asked participants to indicate special needs in order to adapt digital formats accordingly. So my name is Stephania Xydia, and I will be moderating this session on behalf of ICLEI Europe and OpenHeritage Project. I am a Greek woman in her 30s. I have brown hair and greenish eyes. And due to an advanced state of pregnancy, I may appear slightly bloated, short of breath, and but comfortably seated here today. So in the past 2 days, standing at this crossroads and listening to experts on electric vehicles, sustainable mobility, but also cultural activators and community leaders, some of these images came to my mind, followed by questions regarding the social and cultural dimensions of the upcoming, ongoing, let's say, bold shift to electric mobility. Across Europe, we are seeing heritage sites adopting e-mobility solutions such as electric mini trams, electric vans, and bike sharing solutions to minimize the environmental impact of cars, deliveries, and touristic buses. At the same time, we see historical centers being disrupted by sometimes unregulated tourists on electric scooters, impacting not only the material heritage of, for example, stone pavements, but also the daily lives of local communities. Is this worse or better than streets lined with private cars, or does it require a change in our perspective? Yesterday, during the bachelor session, the winning tale for the future of electric mobility was government incentives for electric vehicles must focus on non-car options. Makes you wonder of the social and aesthetic considerations that need to be taken into account in this process. In many neighborhoods, we are already seeing charging cables blocking pavements and entrances to buildings, becoming physical barriers for people with disabilities, but also eyesores for local inhabitants. We also see all sorts of charging stations popping up in our cities, often donated by blatantly branded energy corporations. How will this shape the image of our cities, and how do they change our urban experiences? Interestingly, the United Kingdom has recently launched a national competition to design electric vehicle charging points of the future, acknowledging that these will be cultural landmarks, urban furniture that could become as deeply entrenched in the national identity as the British red phone boxes. How does then e-mobility shape urban culture, and how culture shifts accelerate transitions to sustainable mobility? I know these are big questions, and as non-mobility experts, we cannot answer them, but we could not leave this forum without putting them on the table. After all, this is what Informed Cities is about, isn't it? Facing each other in honesty across sectors and seeking some inconvenient truths. As we're standing at the crossroads then between heritage and e-mobility, I want to take you deeper down the culture boulevard today to explore different ways of approaching both our cultural heritage as a living organism and accessibility as a multi-dimensional concept. We hope that this exploration of accessibility solutions for cultural heritage will provide mobility experts in our audience with some core principles and good questions, if not answers, to consider when designing mobility infrastructures, systems, and policies of the future. To do so, we have adopted the format of a keynote listener, interacting with 3 practitioners. And there could be no better keynote listener, no better provocateur of minds than Lia Ghilardi. Lia is a creative polymath. She has worked for over 20 years with civic leaders, city networks, civic societies, housing developers, and cultural organizations to provide creative and integrated solutions to the challenges of contemporary placemaking. She uses creative thinking techniques to help cities and government organizations to clarify their strategy and vision for the future. She works with interdisciplinary teams because she strongly believes that the complexity of today's urban environments requires multiple solutions from different socio-economic, cultural, urban spheres, the wisdom of crowds. An inspiring public speaker, she lectures regularly on creative thinking and urban DNA mapping methods in universities across Europe and the UK. She's a member of the Academy of Urbanism, a network of influential thinkers, professionals, and decision makers passionate about a better living for people in towns and cities. And she's also a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. So Lia, welcome. I will ask you to start by self-describing yourself and sharing this quote by Calvino that you have selected as our conversation starter.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'll start with a self-description. I'm a kind of mature woman. I'm sitting in my study upstairs on the third floor of the house. I'm dressed in bluish colors with a t-shirt that is blue. I'm wearing black jeans. And you might hear the creaking of the floorboards under me while I speak, because it's an old house. I'm in London, and it's an old Victorian house. That said, I think we can go straight into the topic as to why. Can you hear me properly?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Because there is a little bit of an echo.
Yes, maybe I need to be muted as you speak for the moment. Thank you.
Okay. So I have chosen this quote because to me, this quote, and I can read it to you. The city, however, does not tell its past, but contains it, like the lines of a hand written in the corners of the streets, the gratings of the windows, the banisters of the steps, the antennae of the lightning rods, the poles of the flags, every segment marked in turn with scratches, indentations, scrolls. So what is this about? This tells us about the cities have a past. Cities are a texture, cities are a mesh of people and place. And people interact with place constantly. And in this constant interaction, we have history, we have heritage. So cities are a product of time. That's what we are saying in this quote. They are not just a place, they are a state of mind. So when we talk of heritage, I guess we need to see heritage as deeply connected with a distinctive cultural ecosystem that is never static but in constant movement. I often argue that each place has its own DNA, as you can see in the slide there. Inside that mesh, there is urban and cultural DNA, which is unique to any place and city, etc. So each resource here manifests itself in shared memories, in the narratives the people who live there construct through their daily habits, routines, perceptions, likes, dislikes, social practices, etc. So the idea of heritage as being part of an ever-changing system or ecosystem, as we see that, is very important, because we can't go back, well, that's my argument at least, we can't go back to the romantic idea that of heritage as a static monumentalization of the past. In the world of today, especially, which is much more fragmented, and where difference dominates. Society is defined by hybridity. Identity is much more porous in a state of flux. Nobody really belongs completely to one identity, but rather it congregates around notions of affinity. So we tend to congregate with other people. We tend to hang out with people who think like us, which we share, with whom we share principles. So values which may change also with time, and importantly, are never given or sanctioned from above.
Great. So cultural heritage is obviously not just about our historic monuments, but about cultural resources that can be understood in different ways and span across multiple facets of our past, our present, and our future.
Yeah.
Cities are drama in time, right? Said
Yes,
Ghilardi.
the old Patrick
And
Geddes.
yeah, we will just, as a food for thought, show these different dimensions of cultural resources that is more than heritage. It encompasses our natural heritage, intangible assets, our stories, our ways of being, our traditions, of course, spaces and facilities for collaboration, for co-creation, all the different occupations and organizations, the cultural industries that define the sector, and of course, the festivals, the events, all these opportunities that we have missed in the past 2 years, all these collective experiences that help us connect, think, and feel our cities, right?
Yeah. In a way, if I can add something, it's important to understand and access. Then it's more than looking at what we have had in the past, the layers of history that characterize the place. It's much more than that. It's really starting from the here and now and threading lightly through the past. To use an expression borrowed from Australians' indigenous culture, knowing that it is a contested territory open to different competing narratives and interpretations that need to be navigated and constantly renegotiated. So that to me is, in a word, the task we have when we talk about access. If you think, for example, what happened over the past 10 years when with the movement of the removal of statues. I mean, statues, what are there for? For some people, statues are perceived as the continuation of history's wrongdoings. So no wonder they are contested also. No wonder they are removed in some cases. So when we protest, when we do that, we are in the process of creating our own narratives, our new stories, our new memories of place, of living together, about ourselves and our communities, which over time will consolidate into a shared heritage. So it's this kind of constant mobility, this kind of constant movement that to me will characterize access and policies for access in the future.
Okay, so in this contested territory, who has access and what are the barriers that we encounter in terms of accessibility? So there's of course the aspect of physical and sensory accessibility, and we will see wonderful examples of solutions that actually enable people with different disabilities to access culture, but there's also the intellectual barriers, the economic barriers that prevent people from having access to this shared, contested, but common heritage. So there are different activities that we have seen across cultural organizations, but also cities and other institutions trying to lift these barriers through interpretation, through access solutions, through also digital solutions. And I would like your comment on that, because we often, especially in the mobility sector, we focus on the physical aspect of things, but more and more culture is about digital access.
Yeah, so there's no doubt that digitalization has revolutionized the economy of culture and our relation to culture. I mean, it has led to new forms of production and consumption that transcend the traditional constraints of space and location and time. No doubt about it. And certainly we know that during the lockdown, museums, galleries and theaters began to redirect traffic away from the physical spaces onto the digital spaces and to the digital platforms. But is that enough? I mean, was that successful or not? We don't know. It's too early to say. It was a good beginning. Clearly, having the possibility of virtually visiting a museum, it was fantastic, and that was a sign of museums wanting to open up to genuinely to new audiences. But there is other forms of opening up through the digital technology. The gametization, for example, of museums and heritage, for example, is an interesting aspect, is a trend that is happening in many countries. We know, for example, Italian galleries recently, in the past 7-8 years, actually, have introduced video games and enhanced reality, etc., in order to really showcase what they have in a more playful way, but also in a more interesting and in a way that it gives a better experience to new audiences. The example of Tuo Museo in Naples, the archaeological museum, and the father and son game created by Fabio Viola and his team is a fantastic one, because it tells the story of the collection. It takes you through the collection, through a family saga. So it starts from the individual, it starts from yourself, it starts from what is relevant to you today before you enter that museum. And let's try to make that museum accessible to your particular needs today, as you are today. So then there is the examples of the playable city. For example, there are across Europe and outside many examples of playable cities, which is methods. They are methods of blending analog and digital games, whereby the visitors, but also the local communities, can participate, maybe in planning or regeneration, for example, by using game techniques. So that's all good, but there is a but here, and I know we all sooner or later we will deal with that too. The first problem here is also that games, gametizing, enhancing experience, enhanced reality, 3D reality, all these techniques are very carbon footprint heavy. They're very heavy. I mean, I'm just reading here, and I read it to you very quickly. The California Energy Commission looked at the research in 2015, which shows that globally, PC gamers use about 75 billion kilowatt hours of electricity a year, the equivalent of the output of 25 electric power plants. So that means that American gamers emit about 12 million tons of carbon dioxide annually, the equivalent of 2.3 million passenger cars. So that's one aspect. That's one aspect, that things are changing, and gamer designers are now taking all that into consideration, but it's still to come. It's early days. But at the moment, we have to be aware that there are this challenge, but is obviously the biggest challenge is also the digital divide we have. And the fact that not everybody has access to the internet. I mean, Finland is putting in place projects to bring broadband to every rural place in the country. So they're closing the gap between the big cities and the rural areas. But it's not just that. It's also the fact that access to the internet really should be understood as a human right, just like culture is understood by now as a human right in terms of access. So governments, national governments, European government should begin really to think about establishing internet platforms that connect with state archives, that connect with museums, art galleries, etc., and that put all that information, if not for free, at a very low cost for everybody to access.
So culture as a right, digital culture as a right, new solutions to bridge generations, to bridge different audiences, but also to enable access that is a two-way access. So not just how to get people to the museums, but how to get collections out into remote places or disadvantaged communities. Thank you for giving us a lot of food for thought. The previous session was about energy sources, and I think it's really interesting to also put that into the equation, because we can get lots of fancy tools for access to culture, but there is an environmental footprint to it. And bridging these words, building sustainable cultures is also part of our mission here at ICLEI, at Informed Cities, and we're very happy to start these conversations here. So I think it's time to dive into our case studies and discover these different approaches to enabling accessibility to cultural heritage. We are delighted. Thank you, Leah. We will see you in a bit for the discussion. Please stay as an active keynote listener and come back with challenging questions for our speakers. We will welcome now Maria Vlachou, who's joining us today from Lisbon, Portugal. She is a cultural management and communications consultant, a founding member and executive director of Acesso Cultura, as well as the author of the bilingual blog Musing on Culture. She has an MA in Museum Studies from the University of College London and a BA in History and Archaeology from the University of Ioannina in Greece. She's also alumna of the Davos Institute of Arts Management at the Kennedy Center in Washington. Thank you, Maria, for being here. The floor is yours. Please unmute yourself. I think we need to hear your voice better.
Sorry, I had noticed.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, Stephania, and thank you, Leah, as well, for the beautiful introduction to this session, and thank you for inviting us to be part of it. I will briefly talk to you about our association, Access Culture, which was founded in 2013. We're an association of cultural professionals and cultural organizations based in Portugal, and our mission is to promote access. And just like Stephania said, access for us is not just physical access, but also social and intellectual access to cultural participation. And that means we are not only concerned with the relationship cultural organizations have with the so-called audience, just that unidirectional relationship, but also we are concerned about the opportunities people have to be part of this sector professionally, to consider a career in the cultural sector as managers, as artists, etc. We have a dream. We are hoping to be contributing towards a society where difference will be mainstream. Difference will be more than something uncomfortable we have to live with, but a natural part of our lives. And we have these three main principles that are orientating us in this process. We avoid talking about special people and special occasions. Every person is special to us. And we avoid the expression for all. That's perhaps a utopia, and we don't really understand what for all means. So we believe we need to be a bit less arrogant and be willing and curious to learn everything there is to learn about human diversity before we say for all. Then we're trying to promote the autonomy of people, go beyond the relationship between institutions in what concerns the way people relate to the cultural field, as well as guarantee quality of the services. As I said, there are no special people. There are no people that are more important than other people. So everything we do has to have quality, and we have to show respect to every person we relate to. Just to give you an idea of what we actually do in order to fulfill our mission, of course, we do a number of training courses in order to capacitate our colleagues to identify the physical, social, and intellectual barriers to cultural participation and try to overcome them. We do an annual conference in October every year, which is a big moment for all of us and a great moment for being together in the last 2 years online. We are organizing public debates in different parts of the country, same subject, same time, but different cities and different people involved. We do access audits and consultation. We are actively actually helping culture organizations identify and overcome barriers. We have a website, a fully accessible website called Accessible Culture, where we put together information that has to have with accessible cultural programming, so that people that need, let's say, audio description, sign language, relaxed sessions, etc., they can easily get access to that information. There's not much going on yet, so in June every year, we have Access Culture Week. It is an opportunity for us to bring attention to what we do for a wider audience, let's say, for the whole society. And it is also during Access Culture Week that we hand the Access Culture Awards, again, for work that is being undertaken by cultural professionals and cultural organizations in all three aspects of access: physical, social, and intellectual. We have a number of publications, most of them also in English and available on our website, and perhaps the two of the most recent might be of interest to different people that are following us today. One report on Beyond the Physical, Barriers to Cultural Participation. It was a journey we took around the country in 2017 and help us understand better what kind of barriers exist and what kind of barriers we are directly responsible for and we can do something about. And then our latest publication, The Cultural Participation of People with Disabilities or Impairments, How to Create an Accessibility Plan, which we aim to be a very practical tool for organizations that wish to become more accessible. I would like also to take a few minutes to bring to you a more a specific case study. This is the Fernando Pessoa house, Fernando Pessoa being one of the greatest poets of Portugal. And it underwent refurbishment works in the last years, and it reopened to the public, much more accessible on different points of view in August 2020. This was a particularly happy project for us, and was a project where we had the chance to sit around the table from the very first meeting between the colleagues of the house, the architect, the designer. It makes a whole lot of a difference when we all sit around the table from the beginning and assume a common goal. At this moment, the Fernando Pessoa house is totally accessible to people with mobility issues, with reduced mobility. We see here some images of the entrance. We see that there is a tactile corridor for people also with visual impairments all along the path. There is automatic opening doors so that nobody has to make an effort to get in. The ticket counter is lower so that people of all statures can talk to the person working at the counter. There are labels in Braille. There are tactile materials in order for people with visual impairments to have access to paintings, books, etc. There is also a guide with Portuguese Sign Language. And there are also live guided tours in Portuguese Sign Language and with audio description, apart from having the audio guides. Perhaps the most important, let's say, indicators of the impact of the house reopening to the public came from some of these guided tours. For instance, after the reopening of the house, when there was the first ever guided tour with audio description for people with visual impairments, in the end, visitors said, "I'm very happy to have been part of this, and I want to come back. And I want to come back alone because I know I can't come back alone. I don't need help to come back." So that's that's for us is a great moment of joy and happiness, because exactly this is why we're here. This is what we're working for. And then also to tell you that very recently, apart from the guided tours in Portuguese Sign Language on specific dates and times, the Fernando Pessoa House opened up, if people book with 48 hours in advance, the Fernando Pessoa House guarantees a sign language interpreter for whoever wishes to book that. So for the first time, a deaf visitor actually booked the visit and had a sign language interpreter at the moment they wish to have this to visit the house. These are very important steps, small perhaps, but very important steps. A last comment to tell you that the Fernando Pessoa House website is fully accessible. It means it follows all guidelines regarding web accessibility, which I believe it is now a legal requirement in the EU countries, but not always fulfilled. And also there is a specific page on the website giving details to visitors regarding the access conditions, which is something people need to know in advance in order to prepare their visit and know what they need, they might need or not. And also, we have worked extensively with the Fernando Pessoa House in what concerns clear language, so that the effort not to speak in a technical language of the people who are very much into studying Fernando Pessoa, etc., but for every person who is willing and curious to learn. So this is what I had for you today, and thank you very much again for inviting us.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you especially for bringing concrete examples, concrete solutions, small but very bold steps, as you say, to accessibility, and also for mentioning the importance of language. I think we will go back to that soon, how accessible is the actual content, not just the tools and the channels to get there, but the content itself. I will now take you across the Mediterranean. We will travel east to go to Crete in Greece and connect with Christos Papamichael. He's a graduate of the Theatre Studies Department at the University of Athens and holds an actor's diploma from the Higher School of Dramatic Art Praxis 7. He's the co-founder of the collective culture group WE, which is called EMIS in Greek, which carries out theatre productions, educational programs in prisons, and he's also the production director of the annual Our Festival meeting of Solidarity Artists. So strong social work there. We met back in 2016, I think, at the Goethe Institute in Thessaloniki, where he was a scholar of the Start, Create, Culture, Change program. At the time, he was drafting plans for liminal access, determined to embed the concepts of inclusion and accessibility in the creative industries. 5 years later, I am very happy to welcome him on stage and look forward to hearing where this journey has taken him. So on behalf of Liminal Access, Christos, welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm honored to be among you. Please let me firstly introduce myself and self-describe me. I'm a male in my early 30s. I have no hair. I have a beard. I wear my headset, a light green shirt, and my background is a white curtain. So I would like to introduce you to what we do with Liminal, our organization. Well, Liminal was initiated in 2016, and our aim was to promote inclusion and equal access to arts and culture. We do this because we strongly believe that culture and arts is a great space. For us, it's the best venue to meet and discuss or solve or democratize our societies. So through our action, We aim to contribute to a richer and more diverse creative industry, fostering the equal participation of all the individuals in the artistic processes. We do this by focusing our activities in three main pillars. We offer accessibility services. I will go through the accessibility services later on. Inclusive education, mostly artistic education, and productions. In our inclusive artistic education programs, it might be a long-term workshop or a 2 days or a day-long seminar. We work with trainers and educators like actors, photographers, scenographers, musicians, in order to adjust their teaching methodologies to the particularities of our group. And our participants, our workshop participants, are usually people with and without disabilities, and we try to make sure that our methodologies, our venues, our tools that we use is accessible and inclusive for everyone and is catered to the needs of the group. I strongly agree with Maria's comment earlier that for all it's a utopia, yes, but we are trying for it. Now I'm reading the text of the slide in line with a vision for a creative industry that respects and embraces diversity. We design and realize inclusive educational workshops and seminars addressed both to amateurs and professionals in the cultural sector. In a lower scale, we do provide accessibility services trainings for professionals of audiovisual translators. That includes SDH subtitling and audio description for the visually impaired. So I think we are all familiar with subtitling or supertitling for the deaf and hard of hearing. It's the subtitles of which are also describing the soundscape of a movie, of a video, of a performance. And that helps a lot people with hard of hearing or who are deaf to participate and perceive any forms of art in an equal way with the hearing audience. Then it's sign language interpretation, mostly in Greek Sign Language, but in International Sign Language as well. We apply this service to performances, events, exhibitions, or videos. We also work with deaf interpreters using reverse subtitles. So we employ people from the deaf community in order to provide interpretation, assisting them to be on time using subtitles for them. And last service, but not least, is audio description for the blind or visually impaired people. It's the description of the visual elements that anyone needs to perceive in order to get a clear and a complete image of what is going on in an art piece. Maybe it is a performance or a show or an event or a painting or a photograph. On the pillar of productions, we do productions and co-productions. Our productions are universally accessible, which means that combine all the three accessibility services that we mentioned before. Usually, but not every time in our productions, we have participations of artists that belong to the disabled community. And we mostly work on theater, exhibitions, and dance performances. So I would like to, before getting to a project, deep dive into one of our projects, I would like to give you some numbers. So for the last 5 years in the educational programs that we run. We had more than 1,000 participations. We have completed more than 8,000 teaching hours. And we have worked with more than 25 trainers and educators. In terms of production and accessibility services, we have more than 10,000 of audience members. We had made more than 60 accessible events and productions and providing accessibility services to them. And we have completed 6 inclusive and accessible productions with our organization. Now, after so much effort, we can say that with our team, we are a member of a dynamic network of stakeholders, both nationally and internationally. We have more than 15 stable partnerships with cultural organizations, interpreters, our close partners, let's say. And we have already received sponsorship and support from more than 6 entities, the biggest of them being the Greek Ministry of Culture. And I will go on presenting to you Clickable project, which is one of the projects that we love the most because it combines education, accessibility service, and production at once. Clickable project was a project aiming to get to photographers and people with which are blind or with low vision in touch with the art of photography. We started using by having a 4 days introductory workshop for everyone, and then this team was having a 2 days meeting monthly for 7 months, where we discovered the city center of Athens. We visited ancient and archaeological monuments of Athens using blind photography techniques. And then we all curated and made accessible a collective photography exhibition. And I would like to leave you with a video that describes a bit the whole process of Clickable. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Christos. Let's watch the video before we move on to our next speaker.
Το Clickable Project είναι ένα πρόγραμμα που απευθύνεται σε επαγγελματίες ή ερασιτέχνες φωτογράφους και άτομα με οπτική αναπηρία και στόχο έχει να δημιουργήσει μια δυναμική ομάδα η οποία θα εξερευνήσει την τέχνη της φωτογραφίας. Το πρόγραμμα ξεκίνησε με ένα τετραήμερο εκπαιδευτικό, το οποίο έγινε σε συνεργασία με τον οργανισμό Beyond Sight Foundation από την Ινδία και περιελάμβανε προσαρμοσμένες τεχνικές διδασκαλίας για την τέχνη της φωτογραφίας. Στη συνέχεια η ομάδα, κατά τη διάρκεια 5 διήμερων συναντήσεων, πειραματίστηκε και εκπαιδεύτηκε πάνω σε διαφορετικές τεχνικές. Τα αποτελέσματα των συναντήσεων της ομάδας παρουσιάζονται σε μια προσβάσιμη για όλους φωτογραφική έκθεση. Η ομάδα του Clickable Project, επαναπροσδιορίζοντας την τέχνη της φωτογραφίας, αντικρούει την αντίληψη που επικρατεί ότι η φωτογραφία είναι ένα μέσο που στηρίζεται αποκλειστικά στην αίσθηση της όρασης.
So as we heard, the work of Acesso Cultura in Portugal and Liminal Access in Greece focuses mainly on the physical and sensorial accessibility to cultural heritage, breaking down access barriers through innovative spatial and technological solutions. Our next speaker, Coline Pélissier from France, will introduce us to different aspects of social and economic accessibility to cultural heritage through the work of ACTA VISTA. Coline Pélissier, welcome. You are a PhD fellow in sociology at the University of Paris, and you hold a master's degree in public policy at Sciences Po, Paris, and a master's degree in gender studies at Université Paris 8. You work in the Marseille office of ACTA VISTA, an association of back-to-work programs through heritage renovation. This research field is the basis of your PhD, focusing on social inclusion and at the intersection of social policies and the sense of belonging. So as you are responsible of European and international development of ACTA VISTA, you're piloting European projects and partnerships beyond France. Welcome, Coline. I suggest we first watch the video to get a sense of your work within the heritage sites of France, and then we look forward to hearing about your approach to accessibility.
C'est valorisant que les gens te confient un édifice comme ça pour toi le retaper avec tes petites mains.
So stones reviving men and men reviving stones. I guess it's more than men. I know you involve a lot of women. So speaking of accessibility and equality, I think this is the language, let's say, interpretation that affects our discussion. Coline, tell us, how does this work exactly? And how do you contribute to enabling accessibility to cultural heritage?
Hi everyone, thank you for the invitation first and the very interesting presentation before. So first, describing myself, I'm 25 years old, I'm blonde, I'm wearing a green sweatshirts, and I'm in my office with 2 colleagues at the moment in the same office than me, in Marseille. So first of all, yes, you're right, of course it's men and women. And that's something that is becoming more and more important in our communication as well, because that's something that I think ACTA VISTA is realizing more and more, because our main focus is not accessibility at the beginning. So firstly, based on the video, so ACTA VISTA has been created in 2002. It's an association that is doing renovation of historical monuments based on 3 pillars, and the 3 pillars are the training, because they're training to pass a qualification at the end of the path. There is employment, because our trainees get an income, and there is support, social support, because our social professional managers are helping our trainees to get a job, because that's the overall goal, but also to get rid of many issues that they encounter, such as housing, mobility, health issues, administrative issues. So it's many different things taken at the same time. To talk about accessibility, actually, ACTA VISTA is now developing a new branch of its activity, and we created a new association, which name is La Citadelle. La Citadelle is the project of opening up the fortress Saint-Nicolas. So that's the big fortress that you saw in the video, because we have 5 construction sites today all over France, and the main construction site is in Marseille at Fort Saint-Nicolas. And the Fort Saint-Nicolas is now the cradle of this project of opening up with La Citadelle project. So it's a new thing completely for us to be truly confronted to cultural access to cultural heritage accessibility. However, it's something that we are already doing because to a certain extent, ACTA VISTA contributes to heritage accessibility. As for now, the access to the fortress is limited, but it is dedicated to the most vulnerable people in society. Because all of our trainees, there are 100 trainees at the fortress, and there is 200 more on other construction sites. Our trainees are people that have been unemployed for at least 2 years, and as I said, encountering many different issues. So we defending a model of living heritage and living heritage through renovation. And there is also a lot of work that we're doing on the daily life on the construction sites, on pride and proudness of working on this sites. And one of the factor that is contributing to the proudness of our trainees, according to interviews that I conducted, is that it's a chance to have access to these monuments that is closed for now. So there is a feeling of being the only ones accessing these sites. Moreover, we also have an accessible training methodology because we based our training on pedagogy through gestures. So there is no classrooms, there is no writing, there is no readings, there is only the gestures, professional gestures, and how you can learn a job and renovation through this training methodology accessible to all. Even though I agree with you, to all is a bit an utopia. Regarding La Citadelle, so regarding really the opening up of the sites, that's really a new project, but it's already raising many issues and many questions around accessibility, of course, because it's new challenges that are encountered by many public spaces, I think. So there is many different questions around accessibility. So first one is mobility and space, because we are right at the city center of Marseille, but quite isolated because the public transport in Marseille are not the best public transports ever. And so it's quite complicated to get to the fortress. And for now, we only welcoming classes, schools with students, and they're having issues coming to the fortress by bus. So that's the first accessibility issue that we are encountering. There is also a question of physical accessibility because we are on a fortress, historical fortress. So there is almost not many ways of making it, or difficult ways of making it accessible to people with a physical invalidity. So that's something we're thinking of a lot. But just to go up the fortress, it's a 10 minutes, it's not 10, but let's say 5 minutes walk, and it's very steep. So that's another issue. Then there is also the economic part. So we are raising a lot of questions around that because we have to find an economic model that is sustainable, but that is accessible to the most inhabitants of Marseille. And then there is the cultural aspect, of course, social and cultural aspect. That might be the biggest challenge for many museums and heritage sites. So that's thanks to the work that is done by some associations, as you just saw before. There is a help and a work for this, but it's not that easy. And I think we begin this project with one very big advantage. That is that we have our main target group, most vulnerable people, on the site. So for instance, for European Heritage Days, we're opening the site, and lots of our trainees that are working in the daily life on the site came with their families, came with their friends, and that's because they're working here. So we have this lever of implication of many different people, because now it was 4,000 inhabitants of Marseille, men and women, that have been working on the sites since since the beginning of the construction sites. And maybe for a few insights about this question of accessibility in our case, I think it's quite interesting. The opening of the fortress is a good case study because I think the trajectory of the fortress is quite typical for many heritage sites in France, but also in Europe. So I would like to highlight just a few points that seems interesting. Because the fortress used to be the property of the Ministry of Defense, so a military place, and then the fortress went to the city of Marseille. So it was a municipality which is the owner, and the municipality is really trying and investing to show that heritage can be a territorial and economic resource in the strategic competitive positioning of cities. So they did a call for projects, and we applied, and that's how we are opening now the sites. And in the call for projects, it was a lot about a changing metropolis, how to be competitive, how to be attractive, how to change the face of the city thanks to this capitalization on heritage. Which I find quite interesting. This necessity to foster attractiveness, which is not always easy to fit with the question of accessibility, because there is potential issues of ownership and management. Because many heritage sites that were, at least in France, that's the context I know the most, that were owned by the states are now managed by private organization. So in our case, I think it's great because I love this project and I think it's an interesting project, but it raises still some questions, and we think that there can be an impact of this management, multi-scalar management, and funding on the users. Because we have to find funds to open this place as well. So to conclude and to give you to invite you to come to this site next time that you're in France, the project of La Citadelle is to be the most inclusive as possible, and I was very happy to also see the question, and I'm also interested to hear the other tips of the other participants of how you can make events and sites more accessible, because that's a question we're deeply in this now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Coline.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You've brought into new dimensions about accessibility this debate about how to keep the integrity of historical sites while making them as accessible has raised furious debates between architects and politicians and designers across Europe. Also, the question of ownership and who decides and who funds these sites sufficiently so that they can be sustainable while being accessible, economically speaking, is another issue. I have many questions popping up, but I want to hear from Leah Ghilardi, and we'll invite both Christos and Maria to come back for our final, let's say, reflection and discussion. Leah, is there a burning question that, as a keynote listener, you would like to share? Please unmute yourself. We cannot hear you. Except if you were trying sign language, but we will need your sound too. Thank you.
It's weird because it says it's on the left, but it's now on. Anyway.
Works now. Thank you.
Yeah, fine. So I do have one question for each speaker, if that's okay. But we haven't got much time, so I'll try and do quickly. I'll try and go quickly with this. And I think for Maria, it's interesting that you say at the beginning you don't want to use the word for all, and I think that's I couldn't agree more with that. It's not because it's utopian to say for all. I think it's arrogant to say for all, and I think we need to be more humble in what we are doing and in our expectations from what we are doing, because we live in a society that is dominated by certain forces, and we cannot pretend or just use rhetorical language that says we're going to change it for all. So we can only say we are going to do our best and our most creative to make accessibility open, or open sites and buildings, etc., for what we can, for the population, for the people we are dealing with, according to their needs. I think that's a good aspect. The other question, the other aspect which I'm very interested in, is when you said the people said they want to come back on their own. And I found that extremely interesting, because it's so rewarding. You feel like, oh, we have achieved something. But I want to be controversial, and I want to say the world outside, Lisbon outside, how accessible is the city? I mean, if I want to come there on my own, how do I navigate the city?
It is an extremely difficult city in terms of access, like many cities are. So usually when we have a traveler, a tourist who wants to come alone, probably they will look for specific services, accessibility services, which means that their traveling, their trips become much more expensive. It's not like for everyone else. And this is something we really need to keep in mind. And it's something we discuss with our colleagues in cultural organizations as well, when we discuss for instance, discounts or no discounts for people with disabilities. We need to realize that they have extra costs as a result of a disability, and we need to take this into account.
Yeah, also extra cost, and then in your principle, you say, we don't want to use the word different. So that kind of extra cost dialogue and discussion will inevitably push you back in the territory of having to say, well, we have different people coming.
Well, we're not avoiding the word different. We are different. What is most important perhaps here is to start introducing the word equity in our work, and to understand that nobody has the same starting point. Once we realize that, then we understand the specific needs, not special, specific needs that an activist here in Portugal said, specific needs that come from specific rights. Yeah. She associated these to rights, and this is what I believe we should keep in mind.
Wonderful. Yes, thank you. And then for Christos, I was really fascinated by going around Athens and photographing. I wonder technically, how does it happen? Do you have someone that accompanies the people in this tour and taking photographs? In other words, do you have someone who describes the world to them, to the visually impaired person who's going to take photographs?
Yeah, this project caused a lot of questions since we announced it, and I like it. So some people could do it by themselves. We can all do it using our mobile phones. With the volume button, usually you can take pictures in 3 seconds. So you can close your eyes and try to navigate through light or sound or texture. Most of the participants could do it by themselves. Some of the participants at some points needed some guidance. And one of the most fascinating things on some of our workshops was we visited the national gardens in the city center of Athens. And it was Sunday morning. There was a lot of people, and we were all blindfolded, and people with mobile phones stretched to take pictures. And we took the best pictures ever because people was running to pose for us. They were so willing and so happy to see this happening, which I'm sure that is not the case when you try to take a picture with your eyes on of someone. And yes, it depends.
Okay. No.
And also on the situation. So when we went to the fish market of Athens, and there was a huge crowd, then we are all accompanied, let's say. And if I may, I would like to ask on the previous question for Maria that Athens is a very aggressive city. for everyone, not only for people with disabilities or so ever. I think that we will have to also consider, beside the cost, the stress, the planning ahead that someone needs to do to attend a venue, an event, an archaeological space, anything. Yes, I think the psychological and the stress factor of mobility and moving around the city is something that we also need to take into account.
But it's also for everybody, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
It's like for the well-being of everybody. So what you're doing is an experiment in for us, I mean city makers, etc., people who are into city planning and all the rest of it, to actually realize that accessibility in the different forms you're talking about has to apply to everybody, and it's a holistic approach. So we have to think together. The different departments of the city must get together, and if it is about reducing traffic in particular areas, that will be good for everybody, irrespective of with disability or not. So it's a holistic approach, I think, that we need to take. So it's not just cultural managers that need to be informed about this kind of approaches, etc. It's planners, it's mobility experts also who need to think together and become more creative in that. But then for myself, I have one question for Coline also, which is it's doing a very exciting project. But I'm asking myself, Coline, this is a fortress in the middle of Marseille. Now, what does a fortress mean to the people that are working there? What kind of images does it conjure up in their mind? What kind of heritage is it for them?
Speaking of contested heritage, from the images we have seen, you're integrating refugees, right? You're integrating people from different cultural backgrounds to actually renovate a fortress, to renovate a space of conflict and a space that is supposed to be secluded and inaccessible in a way.
Accessible.
So there's this symbolic and historical side of things.
And what does it mean to them today?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. That's a question that is very important and interesting for us. Firstly, it really depends on the sites, because we're renovating very different type of sites. So some of them are like, for instance, some small castle in the middle of a forest, or some others. There is also the Château de Chambord, which is quite well known, quite famous in the center of France. So it's a king power monarchy symbol. So yeah, it's definitely a question for us, and we're trying to work on this from the integration of the trainees. So when they arrive, they have a visit of the fortress. We explain the history. We also explain the history that can be linked to colonialism. For instance, the fortress, the Saint Nicolas fortress, was occupied by the German army during the Second World War. So it's a heavy story for monuments, definitely. And for instance, also Habib Bourguiba has been in jail at the fortress, and he was the first president of Tunisia after. So and we have a lot of Tunisian people, for instance. So it's also interesting to have their view on this, and yeah, it's definitely I have no definitive answer to this. And it really depends on the trainees, because for some of them, it's really from the interview that I conducted, at least for some of them, it's really there is an added value of working on this, because there is confidence into their work. It's something prestigious. So for some of them, it really makes sense. For some others, not really. And heritage is not the core of the project, and the core of the project is having an employment and having an income. Which is very important too, and maybe more. So it really depends on the profile and on the interest.
Welcome. I think it's a great idea to work on this. to have opportunities really to be part of this project. But I still have concerns about all the different types of heritage and regeneration. Why would you want to regenerate? Why not blow it up, for example? You know, what would happen if you did that? Now, imagine metaphorically, because many years ago, I was working in an Italian city, and they kept talking about the famous heritage, the Gonzagas, and this and that and the other, and they were starving their economy because the tourists were only going there for one day, and then they were going to Venice, etc. So in order to force them to think creatively and to think coming from a different angle on this interpretation of heritage, I said, okay, imagine an earthquake. Sorry, guys, I know you guys are, you know what an earthquake means, and everything has gone. Imagine that tower is gone. Then how else would you talk about heritage to these people that you want to include? You probably want to talk about them personally, their experience of living in Marseille, where they live, which neighborhoods they live in, what are the conditions in those neighborhoods. So maybe it would be interesting as an alternative scenario, imagining that you blow up the tower by mistake.
I think it's interesting, and just two quick things, because I think we're running out of time. But the first thing is that
in 1 minute, Coline, I want to give the word to Maria before we close, and then ask you from the chat for your top tip for city makers or cultural managers to make cultural sites and experiences more accessible. So you've explained a lot, but I would like your personal, deeper tip to those listening today. Coline.
So just to answer Leah, I think the first thing is that that's what we're trying to do with La Citadelle, to do an innovative project and not a history museum about the heritage. So it's also about the project that will be implemented there, and that will be implemented with a lot of public understanding of what people want and what are their concerns. So that's the first thing. And then I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer your question because we are facing this challenge, and it's the first time for us to really address the question of cultural accessibility. So I think Christos and Maria will be more qualified.
You. Maria, final comment? And
actually, it has to do with what you asked us to do.
Great.
Stephania, because we had a question from Katerina about the tips, and very quickly to say that we all need to understand that it's not a question of generosity and of being good people. It's a question of other people's rights, of every people's rights. And we need to understand, first of all, that we're taking decisions every day that are excluding people. We are organizing such and such event, and the first thing we don't go to see if it is accessible. And how can the event itself become accessible? So we need to become more knowledgeable about it. It is an obligation we have. We need to talk to the people who know, who can assist us, and we need to put it in our budget as well. Not everything is a question of money, but some things are a question of money, and we need to, if this is a responsibility, it needs to be in our budget. So that's it. Thank you.
Christos, you're applauding. You want to add a tip?
I couldn't agree more. I think that we need to move away in terms of accessibility, especially for the people with disabilities. We need to move away from many philanthropic feelings we might have. It's an obligation. And I will add something to this, that it's not only something that we have to do, it's something that might open new forms, new methodologies, new practices. It can renew everything that we do and the way that we think. Yeah.
I think that's a wonderful closing message. I will just give the word to Leah for a final thought.
I mean, I just yes, on this idea that really we are opening up new avenues also, while reflecting on accessibility, etc. We are opening up new avenues for cities to really become more equitable and more creative in the way they build their future, really. But thank you all. It's been an excellent morning.
Yes, I also want to thank you all, Leah Ghilardi, for
you.
being this keynote listener. Coline, Maria, Christos, you've given us great examples. I know we have a lot of people in the audience that have never dealt with accessibility, and I think you've opened up the right questions, given tips and insights on how to make not only culture, but our cities more accessible. I keep the note on being a bit less arrogant with this mention for all. I keep the importance of the cost and the importance of really budgeting for these things in advance, of putting this knowledge at the beginning of the planning process and not as a little extra that we add at the end, for public relation purposes, for example, but really also from Coline, the importance of integrating different social groups in the process of conservation, in the process of co-creating and interpreting our cultural heritage, our assets, and all these physical and intangible content. You said that it's utopian to speak for all. I hope that today we tried to sow utopias in order to harvest better realities, in order to harvest more accessible cultural sites, experiences, and more accessible cities, and better informed cities. Thank you for being here. Have a great day. Meet us for the final session to get an overview of this conference, of these different dimensions of the crossroads between e-mobility and cultural heritage. We hope you learned something new today. We hope you make new connections, and we look forward to seeing you at 2 p.m. after a good lunch for an accessible final plenary session. Thank you all.